So if you have your Bibles, turn to Acts 22. We're going to pick up on part 2 of the power of a transformed life. We are in the middle of Paul giving his testimony. Remember, he has gone to Jerusalem to celebrate Pentecost. He's going to squelch any rumors that he's anti-law of God. And James says, do this thing, take these men, complete the Nazirite vow. Paul says, okay. And during the process of that, he gets dragged out of the temple. He's beaten to the point to where he has to be carried by the commander of the Roman guard. And then he gives his testimony. He speaks to them in Aramaic, and they hear him. And so he shares with them his life before Jesus. I was a killer of the church. I persecuted. He shares his life when Jesus knocked him off his horse, literally blinded him. And then he shares with them the testimony afterward, that this is who he is after Jesus has encountered him. So now we're going to continue with that as he testifies to all that God has done. When people's lives are transformed by the gospel and the power of Christ, it should naturally become a growing, key word, pay attention to that word, a growing desire for us to share the story that God has done in our lives. No matter if you've been following Jesus for 70 years or for 7 months, it doesn't matter. We should always be trying to find ways to incorporate what Jesus has done in our lives genuinely, and so we can share the hope, this message. When I say genuinely, is because if you're watching a football game and your favorite team scores a touchdown, everybody's like, oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, let's just go to the Lord in prayer. I'm not talking about that. Because there's ways that we can try to shove the gospel into things, but there's ways that we can naturally incorporate it, especially when people are experiencing pain and hurt and trauma. Like now, I may not be, I might not be able to empathize or identify with what you're going through, but can I share with you something that has really changed my life? Sure. I'm not trying to falsify that bridge. I'm just saying, I don't know what you're going through, but here's what really helped me to get through a dark time. Boom, and then you bridge. And you share the gospel, something as simple as that. So Paul is going to continue to share what he has been experiencing, and then we're going to see rejection. It's going to validate the words of Christ. And then we're going to see just when Paul thought that it was going to be over, Jesus keeps moving him forward in the rest of Acts all the way through. So pick up with me in verse 17, page 747. If you're with us and you have one of our free Bibles, it's page 747. It says, it happened when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance. If you go back to Acts chapter 9, none of this is recorded. Luke records Acts chapter 9, Paul's conversion. He goes into Jerusalem. Now we're going to get an inside view of what's taking place that Acts 9 does not record for us. Paul is in the temple. In other words, he's testifying in Damascus. This is about 3 years later after his conversion. He's testifying in Damascus. People want to kill him. So they rush him to Jerusalem. He's there. He's in the temple. In the sense that now that the honeymoon phase is over with Paul from his 3-year conversion, or his conversion 3 years ago, what does he do? He goes back to his people. He's trying to let the church know, I'm no longer a persecutor. The church is shutting their doors on Paul because they don't know if he's actually genuine or not. It's not until Barnabas observes Paul and he says, well, Paul's pretty actually genuine. But Paul is saying before the encounter with Barnabas happens, I was in the temple and I was praying. In other words, Paul had nowhere to turn to in Acts chapter 9, verses 26 through 30. But so he turns to the Lord in prayer. Have you ever been in a situation where things are going well, you hit a closed door, you're trying to move forward in a certain decision or a certain situation, and you just feel like you have no direction? You're like, well, I feel like I'm floating. I feel like I'm treading water, but I'm not going in any direction. I'm not going left. I feel like I'm just maintaining at this point. I feel subjectively, I get the sense that Paul, during this time that he's about to reveal to us, he hits that point. The church is not wanting to accept him. Barnabas hasn't reached out yet. The Jews are rejecting him. So Paul is like, where do I go from here? I'm going to go to the temple. That's the holy ground. That's where God's presence was supposed to dwell. I'm going to go one-on-one with the Lord. And in the midst of confusion, I'm going to seek God's guidance. That's a lesson for all of us. When you feel like you have no direction, you're just off. You're off. Seek the Lord's guidance. Seek him. For us, we have the church building. You can come in, you can pray. If you want, go to your prayer closet, go to your bedroom, whatever it is. But sometimes we are so busy in our modern day society, we encounter these plateaus in our faith, but we don't even take the time to seek the Lord's presence. We busy ourselves with other things instead. We'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do that. And what winds up happening is that if we're busy doing things for the church in the name of Jesus, you begin to leave Jesus away a long time ago, and you burn out and you wind up leaving the church because you're so busy doing things for the kingdom and for Jesus, you just forgot to maintain your relationship with Jesus. And I love it when people serve. We try to have lots of opportunity. Our ways to serve wall, we try to have them there. Serving in the church does not replace your personal relationship with Jesus. And when you think it does, you're going to be in a very dangerous area. But what we can learn from Paul is that he was in the temple because he needed guidance and direction. What better place to find that in the presence of God? He fell into a trance. This is not like an Eastern trance. He's not saying some chant. He's praying. He's meditating upon God, just like Peter did right before he goes to Cornelius' house. And then this is what he encounters. And then he saw him. Who's him? It's Jesus. He sees him in the temple, which, by the way, parallels Isaiah's encounter. And I believe it's in Isaiah chapter 6. It parallels this. And Jesus says to him, hurry, get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. Paul's seeking guidance. Jesus says, you need to get up as soon as possible and get out of here, because they're not going to accept your story, your transformation story. Paul, the great up-and-coming rabbi. Paul, the great persecutor. Paul, the great zealot. Paul, the great Jewish leader that surpasses all of his peers, is now a born-again Christian talking about Jesus. And maybe Paul thought that if they saw my life before, they all knew that. He had the authority of all the council. Maybe they will be equally as excited if they see the conversion and they will accept my testimony. Nope, that's not going to happen. Jesus says, you need to get out of here as soon as possible. Now, isn't this interesting? Because Paul's comfort zone is the Jewish believers. He's a Jew. He's a Pharisee of Pharisees. He's grown up underneath the law. He knows everything. And isn't it ironic that those whom you are most closest to, when you come to Jesus, will be the very group that rejects you the most? They don't want to hear your story. Because they know you before, you try telling them about your conversion afterward, and they don't want to hear it. Whether you've been following Jesus for 7 months, 7 minutes, or 70 years, you accepted Jesus when you were at Vacation Bible School back in the day, people that are closest to you will tend not to want to hear the gospel from you. That shouldn't discourage us. We still share it. But Paul seems to be trying to make his way into a group so I can share with you with all that Jesus has done. And at this point, Jesus says, that's not going to happen, Paul. You need to get up and you need to go. So whether or not you accepted Christ when you were 8 years old or 80 years old or anywhere in between, within that, what we can learn and what I want us to take away is that when you get rejected from sharing your story, rejection is a distraction from the enemy. Because when you get shut down, people do not want to hear about that. We tend to feel wounded to some degree, and we tend to focus on, why don't they want to hear my story? Oh, is this even worth it? I mean, and then all of a sudden we forget about all the other times people want to hear and people have listened. It takes one discouraging comment to derail your focus in Christ. And so we got to be aware that just because you're close with a group of people, in the times that you're going to give them biblical counsel, they may not accept it from you. But don't get wounded. Don't get distracted. Continue to stay the course and continue to move forward with Christ. Verse 19, and I said, Lord, they themselves understand that in one synagogue after another I used to imprison and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of your witness Stephen was being shed, I also was standing nearby and approving, watching over the cloaks of those who were killing him. Notice as Jesus is sitting in the temple, get up and go. Paul says, here's what I'm struggling with. If they're going to come and beat me, Jesus, to be honest, they have a right to do so. If the Jews are going to come, drag me away, if the church is going to continue to reject me, I used to imprison them. They don't want anything to do with me. The church doesn't want to hear it. The Jews don't want to hear it at this point. Paul doesn't hide from the very fact that he knows at this point he's a lone wolf. People are looking at him in the sense that we don't know if you're genuine, Paul. And again, Barnabas has not encountered him yet. You go back to Acts chapter 9, and you'll see when Barnabas does, then the church accepts him. But he's in a holding pattern, and Jesus is saying, I got something else for you, but he's like, maybe he's accepting his fate, his destiny in Christ. Lord, for 3 years I preached in Damascus. I went to the synagogues. I shared your name. They try to kill me there. Nobody's receiving me here. I'm an outcast of Judaism. I'm an outcast of Christianity. Maybe it's just better this way. But because honestly, look at all that I've done. Why would the church accept me? Why would the church accept me? I don't know. Maybe they're never going to. So Paul doesn't deny the actions before he came to Jesus. And the fact is, nobody's accusing him of this right now. He brings it up because we get a glimpse. He's struggling with his life before Jesus. I beat, I imprisoned. In another letter, he says, I coerced Christians to blaspheme you. I did all these things, and I don't know. Maybe it's too much. Maybe it's too much. Maybe I'm not going to be able to overcome this. In other words, he recounts his biggest struggles of his former way of life, and it almost seems like we get a glimpse when he's trying to minister to the people he thought he's struggling to move forward in that. And so he brings it up to Jesus. How many of us do the same thing? God calls us to a situation, a group, a circle of influence, family, friends, business workers, whatever it is, I'm not sure. But we struggle. The enemy hits us kind of off guard to get blindsided, and we begin to focus on who we were outside of Christ and not who we are inside of Christ. Because if I'm getting pushback from here, and I'm getting pushback from here, and they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to hear it, and they don't want to hear it, maybe I don't want to hear it. We begin to focus on the thing that what is holding people back. And Paul is honest with us. Maybe we struggle with, we can't overcome our past and our reactions of people. And here is where Jesus encounters us the most. Will you still move forward with me? Because now that the honeymoon phase is over of you coming to Jesus, and everybody's like, Paul the persecutor, now he's preaching Jesus. I want to listen. Wow, Damascus is listening. And all the things, he's refuting Hellenistic Jews and all these things. Then he comes to a point where they're just like, we don't want to hear it. So when the honeymoon phase is over in your conversion, in your walk with Jesus, will you still trust him and move forward? Because he's going to grow you in a direction that you probably have no idea or intention of going. But you got to own up to your past mistakes. You just cannot dwell there. So Paul reveals, I think personally, the very thing that he brings up multiple times when he gives his testimony. I once was this. He goes right back to what he once did because this is closest to his heart. And he probably struggles with this, but he knows he's forgiven. But honestly, there's some things that we do battle overcoming. He admits what was going on. In other words, Jesus is going to tell him right here, he says to me, go. In other words, Paul, stop complaining. Get up, go, because I'm going to send you far out of your comfort zone. Paul goes to Jerusalem. Surely the Jews are going to accept my testimony. No, the church? No. I don't know. I mean, I thought I was called to this. No, Paul, I'm going to send you to a place that you didn't even think about because that's where you're going to be the most effective. Where is that? To the non-Jews. Excuse me? You're going to go to the non-Jews. Well, Paul's a zealot. Paul's patriotic. Paul's a national, Paul is everything that these people in Acts 22 are. They're zealous for Israel. And Paul is going to go in Acts chapter 9 as Jesus sends him. I'm going to send you to the place that most Jews do not want to associate with at all, the unclean Gentiles. Because those of whom you thought you were going to reach, you're experiencing closed doors. So now lift up your eyes and look where else I can send you if you're willing and if you're obedient. So this is the defining moment in Paul's walk with Jesus, where he thought he was going to be effective. Makes sense. Rabbinic Judaism, Pharisee Judaism. Jesus says that's not where you're going to be effective. It's going to be over here. And Paul's heart and his humility says, okay, I'll go. Think about that. When you're walking with Jesus and you're just trying to have people come and hear the Lord and have people come to know him personally, and you're just like, what is going on? And we keep trying and trying and trying. We're expending vast amounts of energy, and all we're doing is getting closed doors. Maybe, just maybe, we need to follow Jesus in Matthew 10:14, if you want to turn there, page 651. And whoever does not receive you nor listen to your words as you leave that house or city, shake the dust off your feet. Isn't it amazing when we're sharing with like a family member or a friend and they're just like, no, get your Jesus out of here. I don't want to hear your Jesus. We're like, I'm going to win this person to Jesus. And we exhaust so much what ministry leaders will call sideways energy. And Jesus says, actually, if they reject you, don't waste your time. Oh, no, you're not. Why? Because you are not being effective. At that moment, you needed to shake the dust off your feet, commit them to me, go to another place and keep sharing your story. Keep sharing the gospel. Because for every person that does not want to hear you, there are many other lost souls that are searching for hope in all the wrong places. They'll be willing to hear you. So stop trying to reinvent evangelism. I share with you the gospel. You reject it. The accountability is on you. I'm going to move on. But the church doesn't do that usually. The church just stays and we're going to dig in the ground and I'm going to plant here. It's like, what are we doing? And then we get discouraged because you might be the one that plants. You go on, somebody else might be the one that waters. 2 years later, another watering, another watering. On average, it takes about 7 to 8 times for somebody to hear the gospel for them to respond. You might be the first one, you might be the 9th one. But if we would obey Jesus, I want to share with you, and then I'm going to move on. Somebody else will come back. Because here's the beautiful thing about the gospel. Once you hear it, you can never unhear it. You're accountable to it. I can't manipulate your decision to the gospel. There are preachers and evangelists probably that do. They really pull on the heartstrings and the emotions and all these things, and wherever that lies. But I'm not going to coerce you. I'm going to share with you the good news. Stop trying to find it in this area of brokenness. Just come to Jesus, accept him. He will change your life, but the decision is ultimately yours. I can be here to guide you, but I'm not responsible for your decision. The blood is not on my hands for that. And sometimes I think we take on, like, I presented the gospel and I failed. No, you didn't. Whenever you open your mouth to present the gospel, and if you get shut down 2 words into it, you were successful. Why? I didn't even get to the Romans word. I didn't even get to the altar call. It's because you were obeying Jesus. Obedience to the gospel, you may not get to the full presentation. You have the heart, you start the conversation, you get shut down. Well done, good and faithful servant. Because their response is not your emotional burden to carry. And sometimes we take it on. Paul is like, look, if they're rejecting me. Jesus says, all right, thank you. Get up, go. I'm going to send you to a place where you are going to be effective. They are going to listen to you. And they are going to respond. Verse 22, they listen to him. Now we're back in Acts chapter 22. We go from a history snapshot. Once they hear the Gentiles, they listen to him up to this statement, and they raised their voices and said, away with such a man from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and tossing dust into the air, the commander ordered that he be brought into the barracks, saying that he was to be interrogated by flogging so that he would find out the reason why they were shouting against him that way. Paul says, Jesus, the resurrected Messiah, the Lord of all creation, commissioned me to go to the non-Jews. Nope, that's not going to happen because of patriotism, nationalism. Jews want Rome overthrown from them. Political tensions are high. Sicarii assassins are roaming through the streets. Rome is on high alert at this point. With everything going on, they want nothing to do with the unclean Gentiles that are not part of Judaism. So what we get is that all of a sudden, they see that they don't want that hope to go forward with it. And as they're shouting, some believe that they were either ripping their cloaks as a sign of mourning. And if they took off their cloaks, they were either on a dust floor, they're billowing. They're shaking the floor and all the dust is rising up in this area where nobody can begin to see anything. So if political tensions are high, assassins are already roaming through. Sicarii assassins would kill you with a very small dagger. They roam through the Roman areas. They would try to assassinate Roman officials. They'd walk by you and they would basically shank you is what they would do. And then they would slip out into the crowd and Rome could never catch them. With that, they're very difficult. Now, all of a sudden, Paul's talking in Aramaic. We get that because of Acts 22. The commander apparently doesn't know Aramaic. And so he's like, what's going on? Why are they shouting? Why are they now beginning to start a cloud of confusion? A riot? We need to figure out why they responded, get him into the barracks, and we're going to flog him. The flogging there is not just a whip, like the Jews, if in the temple, if you disobeyed Judaism, they would whip you 39 lashes. Paul got that several times with that. It's not lictor rods, where they would beat you with a reed with that. No, this is actually the more descriptive interpretation is scourging. It's the same scourging that Jesus went through before he carried the cross. From the Romans, cat of nine tails. A small wooden handle, leather straps that had bone, metal, pottery, rocks, anything that would rip open your back and fillet you open in a heartbeat. So they're saying, get him in, stretch him out, make his back tight, because we're about to flog him to get the truth of what's going on. Here's an interesting part. Just when Paul thought that it was over with that, God presents an opportunity for him in the midst of something very terrifying, because most people, when they were scourged, they died from massive blood loss. They didn't usually make it to even carrying across the crucifixion. So the description of the Passion of the Christ in the movie, when it comes to that area, that's actually very darn accurate. That's the ruthlessness of scourging. And so as they stretch him out, notice what Paul says. They stretch him out with straps, and he says to the centurion who was standing by, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? It was illegal in Rome to have a Roman citizen not have a trial and to be in chains and to be prosecuted and whipped or scourged, all of that stuff. This came from what's called the Porcian and Valerian laws. It was illegal. So now that they stretched him out, Paul uses his citizenship to say, can you legally even do this? When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and told him, saying, what are you about to do? For this man is a Roman. The commander came and said to Paul, tell me, are you a Roman? He said, yes. The commander answered, I acquired this citizenship for a large sum of money. Paul said, but I was actually born a citizen. There's ways that you can purchase Roman citizenship, or you can become a Roman citizen, a citizenship born to a father who's Roman. Paul, I was born. You could purchase it. You could be set free as a slave. You could be several other factors. But the highest status of a Roman citizen is if you're born a Roman citizen. This commander says, I bought it because you could bribe your people, benefactor, and they could release you or you could bribe them. He's like, I purchased this with a large sum. Paul's like, well, I got one higher than you. I was actually born a citizen. Which then gives us an interesting insight. Therefore, those who were about to interrogate him immediately backed away. And the commander also was afraid. when he found out that he was a Roman and because he had put him in chains. Because what you're about to do to a Roman citizen, Paul could report this and that could be reversed and that could be done to you. There's a very dangerous point here that they're bypassing all the law. And Paul says, can you actually do this? So, how do we apply that today? Hopefully, you're not going to get stretched out and get your back whipped. Just when Paul thought that he had things going in the right direction, he gets drug out of the temple. Okay, well, that's plan B. I got plan A. Here we go for this. He's getting stomped to death until he gets carried up into the barracks and he says, can I talk to my kinsmen? Sure, go ahead. And then all of a sudden he sees an opportunity to share. Now I got all those that are part of devout Judaism. This is Pentecost. You got a lot of Jews that come from all over the known world. He says, I got them all kind of in one area. I'm going to give my testimony. Surely they're going to see. Nope, they don't. So now he's going to get drugged away when now you're going to get flogged and beaten. And so again, maybe this is it. And Paul's like, well, actually, I'm a Roman citizen. Excuse me, you're what? I'm a Roman citizen. Paul keeps encountering in his life where the enemy is trying to put a period. Jesus puts a comma. You're going to get beaten to death, period. Jesus is like, nope, you're actually going to testify to the Jews, comma. Well, surely they're going to reject him. So they reject Paul, period. Nope, now you're going to be able to testify to the commander, comma. And then later on, look at verse 30. Now on the next day, wanting to know for certain why Paul had been accused by the Jews, he released him. In order the chief priests and all the council, the Sanhedrin, to assemble, and he brought Paul down and placed him before them. Centurion guy's like, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to put you before the Sanhedrin, the people that just brought you to me. They don't like you anyways. And so where the enemy says, here's where they're going to condemn you, period, we're going to see in chapter 23, 24, all the way through, Jesus puts a comma. Nope, you're going to testify to them. Well, then they're going to try to assassinate you, period, and kill you, comma. Nope, you're going to appeal to the Roman officials. All the way through till Paul and the life that he has, he testifies before Rome, before Caesar, before he gets beheaded. All these things, the enemy is trying to snuff Paul out in a very fearful situation of getting flogged, getting beaten, getting in prison. Jesus kept putting a comma through everything. No, Paul, I have another plan. No, Paul, even though you're experiencing fear and anxiety right now in this situation, this is not your destination in my plan. I'm going to continue to move you forward. Now, we're not physically immortal. We all have a expiration date. All of us are going to pass away sometime soon. Sorry to break the news to you. You are going to die. But it's what happens when you live, what some poet said, your birth date, your death date, how do you live in between the dash? How are you living? Are you focused on the right thing? Are you focusing on all the periods that the enemy is putting in your life? Your sin that you think can never be forgiven, your stumbling, your mistakes, and all these things. The enemy's like, period. Just complete the sentence in your life. That's it. And Jesus says, no, I'll put a comma there because your story's not over. You have breath in your lungs. You had a heartbeat going on. Your story's not over, but will you trust Jesus? Even if you're going to be led into a den of wolves or a den of lions and all these things, will you trust Jesus and follow him no matter where he leads you because he has the plan for you to be the most effective for him? But are you aware of that? Or are we trying to, like Paul, we're going to just stay in Jerusalem, we're going to try to stay in the temple, and Jesus says, I got bigger plans. But you're going to have to trust me on this. Okay, I trust you. I'm going to send you out of your comfort zone, big time, to reach a people that most people don't want to reach. And you're the key person for that. And you're like, oh, wow. Can I think about this, Jesus? I don't know. When do you need my response? Sooner the better. But my point is, Jesus always has a plan for your life. But are you sensitive and aware of that? What's going on around you? What doors have shut for you? What doors is God opening for you? And why are you afraid to walk through that door and experience what Jesus has for you on the other side? What's holding you back? Paul had a way of living sacrificially for the Lord, and whether he was in the Philippian jail, getting beaten by rods before they imprisoned him and Silas, he had a way of seeing every situation to say, Lord, where is the opportunity in this situation? Because it looks dark. It looks hopeless. Uh, I don't want to be beaten. And I don't want to have a prison ministry where Jesus says, hey, you're going to get locked up for whatever reason. It's like, well, I don't know if I want to volunteer for that, but Lord, I trust you no matter where you lead me. Because here's the reality, our life is brief. And what we do now to build the kingdom of Christ, we live for eternity. We don't live for the present moment. So no matter what trial, no matter what fear and all the things of what's going to happen, yeah, it might come to you. Your health and everything might fail. Yes, absolutely, along that line. But how do you live in between the dash to where you're saying, Jesus, you know what? It's dark, but I trust you because if you're leading me there as the shepherd, that means that you've gone before me. The shepherd doesn't drive his sheep from the back like cattle. The sheep follow the shepherd because the shepherd's always in front. And Paul had the sensitivity to say, okay, here we go. From here on out, we're going to move at a pretty rapid pace in Paul's story because it's all testifying where you look at secular history, and I brought this up before, secular history that doesn't believe in Christianity or God, they will say Christianity spread because of Paul. He is the founder, quote unquote, of Christianity. No, Paul was just obedient. And Paul was looking for the commas that Jesus was placing. So here's a couple of points I want us to walk away from. The power of a transformed life includes Jesus in all decision making. Seek him, search him. I'm confused. I have no direction. I don't know what to do. Perfect season to reflect and seek. Where are you, Lord? Paul's in the temple. He's praying. I'm seeking, I'm pouring. Lord, tell me what my next step is because I feel like I'm at a plateau. I'm just treading water at this point. I don't know what direction to swim in. So include Jesus in all you do. And point number 2, allow Jesus to place a comma in your life's mistakes where the enemy is trying to place a period. Allow Jesus to use that comma and move forward. Because the enemy is going to bombard you to just stop. But if we surrender it to Jesus, I'll have a run-on sentence for my life until finally Jesus says, okay, now it's time to come home, period. Okay. But it takes a surrendering of your will, your dreams, your ambitions, and being willing to be used by God to say, okay, you're writing my life story still. Help me to see what I'm not seeing. And so my challenge piggybacks off of the last point. Go throughout the week and the month and see the commas in your life and move forward with Jesus. Stop dwelling in the past. That sentence, keep moving forward. Because the enemy will do everything he can to stop you. But you have the choice and the freedom to say, I'm not going to allow that to happen. I am going to own up to my sin. That's the previous me before Jesus. I'm going to live in who I am in Jesus now. And that's where I want to live in between the dash effectively. To Lord, I want all of this to glorify you until you, Jesus, put the period in my life and you say, come home. And Lord, willingly we hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Because then we have eternity. So don't get focused on the temporary trials and tribulations. Focus on what is God teaching you through this so you can get to the next season in life.